So what's the outlook for telcos? First of all, what do we mean? Look, a sophisticated audience, I think this is stating the obvious, but I think there's a couple of things I'd really like to say here in terms of the distinction between consumer and industrial IoT. Firstly is the industrial IoT tends to have a lot more cellular connections, which is obviously much more attractive to telcos, whereas in consumer IoT it's a lot more local area network, so it's Wi-Fi, it's Bluetooth, it's Zigbee, we'll see wide range of technologies, but a lot of them are not involving any data revenues other than through fixed broadband, through a Wi-Fi hub or other hub aggregation device in the home. The second thing is, I think the other two are, if anything, more critical. First one is in industrial IoT, there is typically a bigger end-to-end solution. We've heard the word solution quite a lot. The word we haven't heard so much is ecosystem. That we talk a lot about ecosystems in wider IoT space. But there is it's not just a device, a connected device. It is a service wrap around that. It is a platform. It is data gathering. It's data analytics. It's an end-to-end solution. So it's a much more sophisticated proposition in industrial IoT. And that leads me on to the third differentiating feature, which is in industrial IoT, there is invariably a business case built around a use case. It's been analyzed to death. I know because we've done many such analyses and come up with a business case that says, if you invest this much in your IoT solution, digital transformation, whatever you call it, for whatever business process or function it may be, there will be a benefit seen with a payback period and an NPV, and there is a clear understanding of the financial benefits. In consumer IoT, there is a bit, and we kind of heard it alluded to this morning, there's a bit of a build it and they will come, if we're lucky, mentality, because there isn't an immediate need. There isn't, we didn't all wake up 3 years ago thinking, God, I've got to have a voice-controlled speaker to turn my music on. No, we managed it fine. We could turn it on our phones. Even before there were smartphones, we could still deal with it. So there is a bit of consumers need to be taken on a journey, and that's a starting point. Businesses very much more clearly understand the value of IoT. Consumers have yet to be really certain what it is. We are in an early adopter environment, but it's moving fast towards a mass market environment, and that's going to make for some changes. Again, this will not be a surprising picture. What does consumer IoT mean in the average home? It's here, there, and everywhere. I mean, I can give you. I'm aware that I'm an early adopter. I'm on my second connected toothbrush right now, and that's really frustrating because my smartphone is still connected to my now defunct and thrown away first connected toothbrush. And every day I get a message saying the head on my toothbrush is no longer up to date. I've got to connect my phone to the new toothbrush, and hopefully it'll forget about the old one. But there's so much frustration. I've got a Dyson connected fan. When I bought it, I spent 15 minutes lying on the floor trying to get it to connect to my Wi-Fi, to connect back to the app, to get the thing working. And now I can sit in my sitting room and know what the air quality is like in my bedroom. But did I miss not knowing what the air quality was like in my bedroom beforehand? I'm not sure I really did. I'm not sure I really sold myself. But I mean, if the manufacturers are saying build it and they will come, I go out and buy it and then work out whether I need it or not afterwards, which is what they're looking for. But I'm not sure that's the mass market. So. There are so many examples. I think that there are some, joking aside, there are some more serious examples. I mean, the whole home security thing, just to allude to the Champions League of the last couple of nights, without mentioning any teams, forgive me, but in the UK at least, some pretty prominent advertising was given to Ring, the connected doorbell. As a second-generation Scouser, it's interesting that the burglar in this advert is a Scouser, and there was some commentary around that. But again, putting UK regional variations aside, we won't go into detail on that. But there is a very real point about the benefit, home security driven, and it is an area that telcos can play in. So home security, obviously AT&T are a big player there. We'll come on to that. We'll talk about that. I've worked with telcos who have. I mean, telcos can look at this from a wide variety of angles in the sense that, so home security can be, obviously there's kind of plug and play. You just buy a solution off the shelf, ship it, plug it in, it works, you connect it with an app. But there can also be more sophisticated engineer install, and a lot of telcos actually now have surplus capacity. They manage their field forces so well, and we've worked with telcos helping them to understand, well, could they do a complete end-to-end solution where you upsell from a DIY solution up into a more sophisticated engineer installed solution. the jury is out as to how much money can be made from these things. It remains to be seen, but it's certainly an entry point. Connected car we'll come back to. I think it's a really, really interesting one. We put it here in consumer IoT because, of course, there's a big aftermarket. So most often when we think of connected car, and in the discussions we've had today, we're thinking of ODMs working with a complex, genuinely an ecosystem of providers. It's one of the most mature vertical IoT use cases or industries in the industrial IoT environment. But there is a significant aftermarket as well for consumer IoT solutions. But it's complicated, and we'll come back to that. The stat, I guess, that you can find different numbers for different. We just thought this was a good number, so we picked it from Australia for no apparent reason other than we could find the data. And again, that's the joy of being a consultant on stage without that question. Hopefully you've forgotten this stat by the time the Q&A comes up later. But the key point is, in a kind of 4-year horizon, we're looking at doubling the number of connected devices in every home. So whether that's everybody else will have their second generation toothbrush or not, I don't know, but there will be a lot more devices, and they will remain over that horizon, I believe, remain fragmented, remain a lack of really good interoperability between those devices, although it is improving, as we'll see. So, again, as a consultant, there's a numbers page, and thanks to our friends at Gartner for I'm sure the small print, which is a bit fuzzy, was being read by the other consultants in the room in the first instance. But some Gartner figures on the size of the consumer IoT market, or the consumer and the business, industrial IoT market. The only real thing to point out here is obviously a lot more, and this is about devices, it's not about services. Obviously the consumer IoT market is really the number of devices that are out there are what really make the difference. So obviously in terms of shipments, there's a load more devices going out. Roughly 2/3 of devices shipped by 2020 will be consumer devices compared to industrial IoT devices. That's different to modules, but devices. And in terms of value, okay, the industrial devices will be worth more, but it's still over half of the market, so roughly $340 billion worth of devices in the market. It's a lot of equipment. It's a lot of opportunity, but the question is, what can you do with it? In terms of the services that drive it, infotainment being the big one, again, I'll come back to that shortly. Home automation and automotive. And just on that automotive one, I said I would come back to it. A complex slide, forgive me for that. This is a value chain we tend to use for IoT, whether it's industrial or consumer, or a value chain framework. I'm sure you will have seen various versions of this from different sources. We've tried to look at where the value sits around that and whether it's growing or declining. Not growing or declining in absolute terms, but in proportional terms. So where are the value shifts in the value chain? I think the key point here is for a consumer IoT play in automotive, it's so hard because all of the value is over here, and actually if you're coming in as an OEM and you're building, effectively you're not building automotive is really about building software platforms these days. A car just happens to be a software platform with wheels on. And so the ability to integrate all of that complex ecosystem of hardware, software, services, platforms at the point of manufacture is so much easier than going in as an aftermarket. The market opportunity, you can say automotive is a huge opportunity, but playing it from a consumer IoT perspective, it's obviously a much, much smaller and a much more difficult market to get into. Technology is also a huge driver of complexity. We've heard various of these technologies bandied about, discussed this morning. I think again to the point I made earlier regarding the difference between consumer and industrial IoT, it's not just about Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. A key point from a telco perspective is that a lot of the new technologies are very low bandwidth. So in terms of driving data, in terms of driving revenues, as we heard from the panel before, it's a real challenge. It's a real challenge, and it's got to be about services. This is not a data play. It's got to be a service play, and in consumer IoT, that's very, very hard to get into those services. But coming back to, so who is actually winning? If telcos aren't, and we'll come back to telcos, but if telcos aren't, who's winning? I'm sure you're familiar with these products, the Amazon Echo range, with Alexa as a voice assistant, Google Home with the Google Assistant, and Apple HomePod with Siri. The eagle-eyed amongst you in terms of that market share, obviously Amazon dominates, Google at 32% and Apple at 12%. We'll note that that doesn't add up to 100. There's some equipment from Sonos that's kind of effectively a bit of a rounding error on the others. Amazon is way ahead, and it demonstrates the power of retail and the power of distribution in any consumer play. Because actually, if you look at the accuracy, sorry, this statistic is a little bit hard to understand, but what it means is Amazon Alexa understood 57% of questions asked in a like-for-like study and got 82% of them right. That's compared to Google Home Assistant, which basically got 68% of the questions, answered 68% of the questions and got 91% of them right. So it is actually a superior product on a reasonably objective test. So you can decide for yourselves whether the questions were fair and reasonable, all the rest of it. Probably, if the question was who's going to win the Champions League, it might have been challenging. But so the point being is that these are devices that are really locking out the home. What's, to me, quite surprising is how poorly Apple is doing. But let's face it, we've all seen Apple do badly before, and they've come back. They never write Apple off. There are a lot of rumours about second generation and even third generation HomePod products and how it will improve. Apple is a very fast learner and will be back and will strengthen its role in this space. But right now, Amazon is way ahead of the pack. I thought the other interesting statistic, I can't quite remember where I heard this, so forgive me, but it was in the run-up to Christmas last year, the most ordered product on an Amazon Alexa voice-controlled assistant was other Amazon Alexa voice-controlled assistants. So it is fulfilling its own prophecy of people are finding it very easy to order more of them. Hey, can you order one for my sitting room? Can you order one for my bedroom? Can you order one for wherever? Which is, again, all part of the success. It's that integration with retail and distribution is very powerful. The resolution on here is losing a lot of these. The message, though, I hope is clear. This is just looking at the part of the success of these products is their integration with third-party applications. So these are various functions in terms of consumer IoT applications, and those could be a mixture of hardware, software, and so on. And then looking at which of these main Amazon, Google, and Apple are integrating. There's also Wink, which is integrates itself, both Alexa and Google Assistant. And then SmartThings also integrates Alexa and Google Assistant and is obviously the Samsung IoT, consumer IoT brand, which is obviously partnering with Vodafone in Europe as well. The key message being, it's all about the apps. It's all about getting, if you're going to control a smart home, you need to have the ability to control enough devices to make it meaningful. The reality is, though, because these lists are, there are a number of overlaps, but there are also a lot of points that are discrete. Consumers are very confused. Should I get an Amazon Echo? Should I get an Amazon Alexa? What does it mean? It's not just the decision on a £100 speaker. It's a decision on virtually every appliance in your home, looking forward in terms of how your connected home is going to evolve at the moment, because there's no interconnectivity between these systems per se. There might be devices and apps that work across both. Amazon is also, and it's worth noting, one of the most, based on deal count, so this is a somewhat imprecise science, but Amazon has been the most active in terms of deal count investor in IoT smart home technology through acquisitions in the last 5 years. It's just they are really trying to corner this market. They are investing heavily, and they've got a lot of focus. And the only reason for making this point is that telcos have to learn from this level of focus and this level of investment. If you want to be successful in this space, you've got to take it seriously, and you've got to play the game, and you've got to play with some pretty big players. Again, an M&A map, it's not exhaustive. It's just to say there's a lot of activity, everything from Samsung acquiring Harman Kardon speakers, which is a big deal, 8 billion, completed, I think, last March. It's mainly actually around industrial IoT, because they're a huge provider of connected car platforms, but there is a lot of consumer IoT products in there as well in terms of connected speakers, and so on. I won't drain it. I think it's It's just that, again, the message is this is still a very fragmented market. It's the M&A isn't slowing down. If anything, it's still speeding up. There are still more startups. There are still more ideas. One example that I had to kind of sit down and think about is Whirlpool buying Yumly. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, and I have to confess I wasn't. So Yumly is a recipe app that you basically use to you put the ingredients you happen to have available on the side. It scans them with the camera, recognizes most of them, and then comes up with recipe suggestions based on the ingredients you've put out. Very clever. It's got 20 million registered users at least. That was the last time it quoted numbers. And the last time it was valued at $100 million, which is, for a recipe app, I think is I wish I'd thought of it. So Whirlpool bought Yumly in 2017, and they've integrated it. They've integrated it with Whirlpool ovens. So now you take your ingredients, you take your chicken, as the picture shows, out of the fridge, you put it on the side, you take a picture of it. The app says, oh, you can make roast chicken with that. Amazing. I wouldn't have thought of that without the app. That's brilliant. It's a big step forward. Big step forward. I was just going to, chuck it in the microwave and see what happened. But now it will actually tell my Whirlpool cooker what temperature to set and for how long. And then presumably the app tells me to put it in the cooker and I put it in, and then when the app tells me, I come back and take it out. I mean, this is this kind of build it and they will come. I think it's fascinating. Whirlpool thought that was worth at least 100 or somewhere in the region of $100 million. But only time will tell if they were right or not. I suspect they probably are. And I mean, the amount of, the value of ready meals, which is in the many, many billions, it would be an indicator of how significant this kind of technology is. But it left me a little bit flabbergasted, I have to say. But a fascinating example. So the challenge for telcos, very, very simplistic view of the world. You've got the ODMs and you've got apps. And I specialize in telco. I'm a TMT guy, right? I'm here talking to you because I want telcos to do well. What I see is a risk in the consumer IoT landscape that telcos are being disintermediated by smart manufacturers, smart device manufacturers, working directly with application and service providers, and telcos being disintermediated. And that's clearly a risk. That's it. It's a risk. And the only way to overcome that risk is to give it, as I think we heard at least a couple of times this morning, more focus, more attention, and more investment. That's not to say that telcos aren't doing anything. I said I would eventually come back to telcos. In terms of consumer IoT, we've just had a quick scan of the market. This isn't any kind of exhaustive or indeed MECE study. It's just a bit of our view on where a somewhat random selection of operators are focusing or developing consumer IoT solutions, everything from SIMs and devices through to a kind of broader IoT marketplace and into third-party partnerships. I'm very pleased that Vodafone was at the top of the list, given the keynote speaker this morning. I wasn't aware of that when I set this up, but that's good news. And I think it's safe to say that we see Vodafone, along with AT&T, as probably the two leading telcos globally in the consumer IoT space in terms of what they're doing with it, and we've heard about both of them. Unfortunately, we've heard about both of them because I've now got a case study on both of them, but again, we won't waste time on that. It has been mentioned, and I think it's worth pointing out that AT&T's Digital Life is worth around the $1 billion mark. That is, quite it's a non-trivial valuation. It was rumoured in the second half of last year that they were looking at possibly divesting Digital Life to help fund some of their well-documented larger acquisitions that are in the pipeline. I haven't heard any more about that other than a rumour. I'd be a little bit surprised from what I know about how significant it is to them in terms of certainly the noise they make, and it was referenced earlier that it's on their calls and they talk about it. Sorry, that they don't talk about it, but I think there is a lot of, when you talk to AT&T executives inside the business, certainly they reference their IoT strengths as something the business is focusing on as well. We've heard from Vodafone. I'm obviously not going to dwell on this again. I think the one thing I'd comment on, I was talking to one of from Rick from Vodafone, who's here somewhere. Hi, Rick. We're talking about VBAG in the break, and it just made me think, and I was commenting on the confusion around, if you like, asset tracking. VBAG, allowing a customer to track a thing, there's Tile, there's Square, there's all these. So if a consumer just goes out to try and find a simple asset tracking device, I just, after our conversation in the break, I Googled it and found about half a dozen to maybe 8 in the space of 30 seconds of going and tapping in asset tracking. I mean, it's just that, which one do I choose? What's the difference? How does it work? So I think, look, if Vodafone can actually generate monthly subscription revenues out of these services, then absolutely brilliant, because that's what the market and the industry, that's what the telcos need to do, and it's what I think it's hard to do in consumer IoT, because you've got to demonstrate the value out of doing so. But it's only really through a combination of in-home and remote asset tracking which will give you that added value, I think, for consumers. Again, I'm not going to dwell on it. We've talked, this is a Vodafone Samsung SmartThings partnership. So SmartThings, Samsung's consumer IoT brand, vHome and SmartThings have announced a partnership. So Vodafone and Samsung coming together in Europe at the moment. I think it was launched with an announcement for Germany and Spain being the two lead markets, and an expectation that will roll out across Europe in the coming, during 2018. But the two sides of the slide are unconnected. On the right-hand side is more again a bit of an interesting data point. Is a survey conducted by NTT on which firms are best positioned in the smart home market. It was conducted by NTT in relation to the insurance business. So they were working to try and promote services to insurers, IoT services to insurers, which was mentioned by Stefano this morning. But what's interesting, so not surprisingly, major technology firms are right there at the top, and they're the best positioned, and they're certainly taking advantage of that position. Home appliance manufacturers are second, but telcos do come third, and that is, you could say third is not good enough, but you could also say, well, third is better than fourth or fifth or sixth or seventh. There is a ray of light, there is an opportunity there, but it's not easy for telcos to tap into. Just to show that there are more niche offerings, this one amuses me. Telecom Austria have partnered with Microtronics and with a company called Viking to develop a robot mower that is marketed by Telekom Austria in Austria. I put this up simply because it's just to say, Vodafone have a very core set of services, but it can be anything. IoT can be anything, and these services, there is no reason. This to us is an example of what we would call B2B2X. So we said consumer IoT is a wholesale play for telecoms. Absolutely, I agree with that comment. I think there is a direct route to market. Each telco needs to decide if they're going to do wholesale, direct retail, or both, and risk that competing with their own customers. There's no simple answer to that question. This is an example of where Vodafone is an example of direct to consumer. This is, and obviously Vodafone are also doing B2B2X, so working through a wholesale route as well. But this is an example of just to show a more complex, or an example of a complex solution developed for a fairly niche product. But hey, who wouldn't like to have a remote-controlled robot mower doing their lawn for them on the weekend? This is the last slide. And these are the closing thoughts, really. Telcos do most certainly have a significant role to play in consumer IoT, whether it's retail or whether it's through indirect wholesale routes. But absolutely echoing the comments of the panel earlier, investment and focus is required. It's the only way that the service can grow, it's the only way that market share can be gained, and it's the only way that challenges can be overcome. And those challenges are not trivial. So just selling connected hardware is a low-margin business. It's not something that's natural to telcos, so it's a big challenge for them. Monetizing the data generated by consumer IoT is I haven't talked in this. I mean, it's the final point on the right-hand side is the challenges around data privacy, data security. It's very well known, it's very well understood. We've heard reference to it this morning. It is a big issue to overcome for consumer IoT to be a success, because consumers are nervous, they're ill-informed, relatively ill-informed, and they're very concerned about sharing data and what happens to their data, or they're more aware of it, but without really the knowledge of where the dangers lie, I guess. And finally, just how to build the right ecosystem. Again, Stefano talked about partnerships. We see partnerships as being critical to telco's success. As the kind of simplistic diagram earlier put it, telcos are kind of in the middle in terms of the connectivity, but in the middle gives them an opportunity to leverage the kind of the relationships with both device manufacturers and applications and services, and we see that as a real opportunity. But as already stated, it needs investment and focus to be a success. Thank you.
I think we've got time for a couple of quick questions before our next panel. Yeah, Vincent.
It's Vincent Hebling, Proximus. I was wondering, you mentioned the voice assistants.
Yep.
Some telcos are developing their own. You may also think about integrating telco services or even their interactions with their customer service into this voice assistance. How do you see the telco play into this voice assistant market?
I'm not working directly with any telcos that are currently developing their own voice assistant, or at least I'm not working with them on that part of what they're doing.
That means you can say anything then.
Sorry?
That means you can sell what you really think.
Well, yeah, so my experience of telcos trying to develop their own technology when it's already been developed by technology players is that they tend to fail. They'll spend a lot of money, take a lot of time, and it actually distracts from partnership activities, because telcos have, allow me to play devil's advocate a bit, telcos have an inherent belief that they can do these things as well as others. But in fact, the guys who are doing it already are so advanced that you'd be crazy not to partner. I think that particularly on voice assistants, I think you're already looking at at best a 3-horse race.
Is that even the case when we're talking about sort of other languages, for example? I mean, I think it's like Orange and Deutsche Telekom are doing the Jingo one. So is there some kind of opportunity there in terms of the language?
I'm not an expert on that, I'm afraid. Can't comment.
We've got time for one more question before we move on. Yep.
Can you go back to the last slide? Yeah, I just want it's a general comment really. Could you comment on just your opinion of the margin structure associated with that business model?
Only at a very high level, and that's mainly because it's obviously privileged information, but it is a cellular solution, so it requires there is data usage, but there is a service revenue associated with it, and there's a revenue share on the service revenue. So I can't, which is obviously high margin, but
I mean, I guess my question was, the margins have got to be really pretty squeezed all the way through that value chain.
The margin, well, because it's subscription revenue, so the margins are high depending on how you measure them. So there's the cost of if you assume the development costs are capital expenses, the gross margin on the service is very high, but it's shared between 3 parties in this value chain. So I can't really go into more detail, I'm afraid, but you get the idea.
Jonathan, thank you very much once again for that presentation.
Thank you.